So today let's go over reproduction. So far we talked about cellular reproduction, and today we're going to cover the sexual reproduction. I should have put right here sexual reproduction. Basically today we're going to make babies. Before we made cells when we talked about cell reproduction, and today we're going to make babies. So what is reproduction? Reproduction basically, it's a natural process, of course, where new individuals or new babies or new offsprings are generated or made so the species can be perpetuated. Now, animals can reproduce two ways: sexually, asexually. Sexually, what's important means two parents. Now, when you get two parents, offsprings are going to look like the parents, but not exactly the same. Asexual reproduction is the reproduction in which only one parent actually it's going to be using its gene to perpetuate the species. So the offspring is going to look exactly the same. So for asexual, it's exactly the same. For sexual, it's a combination of both parents. Now, if you look at us, we are a combination of both parents, so which means that we reproduce sexually. Types of asexual reproduction, it's fragmentation and parthenogenesis. Fragmentation, as the name tells you, fragmentation, you fragment, you break off something. So you got a piece of like this, like a sponge, a small piece breaks off, and then this small piece is going to grow into a big one, and both are going to look exactly the same. Parthenogenesis, it's a little bit different. This is a modified sexual reproduction. It's not really sexual. It's not really asexual, but it's a modified one. Now, what happens here? You use this is very important, unfertilized egg. Unfertilized. Since the egg is unfertilized, basically the baby, the offspring, it's not able to reproduce. It's not able to reproduce. Basically, when parthenogenesis occurs, you're going to get an offspring, but that offspring, it's not able to make babies. In our case right here would be the honeybees and the ants. Ants and honeybees, actually, they reproduce, or they have a queen which will be able to lay the eggs, and then those eggs will turn into honeybees. Now, how the queen basically forms, pretty interesting process. What I read about it, it's basically the honeybees or the worker bees choose one of the eggs that will turn into a queen, and then they feed a different type of food that egg, and eventually that egg will turn into a queen. Queen is the only one that's able to lay the eggs, as I mentioned earlier, and reproduce. Now, let's look what happens during sexual reproduction. To have sexual reproduction, we have to have gonads. Gonads are basically these organs that are able to produce gametes. We talked about gametes when we talked about meiosis. Now, the two gonads that we know are testes and ovaries. Testes in male, ovaries in female. Testes produce sperm, ovaries produce the eggs. Now, during copulation, well, you guys know the bad word that you guys use. Basically, the male deposits the sperm into vagina. Now, remember, the male organs that are involved in reproduction, it's not the penis, and the female, it's not the vagina. The male organ involved in reproduction are the gonads, the testes and the ovaries. Those are the only two able to produce the gametes. Penis and vagina are just there to work with each other. Vagina developed first, then the actual penis. So basically the penis is just able to put the sperm inside the vagina. That's why male developed a penis. Now, during the of copulation or fertilization later, first is copulation, male deposits the sperm, then fertilization, basically the haploid. Haploid means the end or the single chromosomes. Gametes come together and basically produce a zygote. So now we go N plus N, you end up with 2N. These two are haploids. This one is called diploid. So a zygote, it's diploid. Now, some animals are also hermaphroditic, which means that they have both male and female organs, so they can have cross-fertilization. We also learn with the genetics that plants are also hermaphroditic, not only animals. Plants, flowers, have both the male and the female organs. Another type of fertilization, it's external. External, it means that it's outside the body. Basically, the egg and the sperm, they join outside the body. Now, the only one that could have external fertilization have to be found in water. So they have to be aquatic animals. So fish, basically what they do when they spawn, female goes, lays the eggs on some still water towards the shores usually, and then the males comes and spray the sperm in top. And then a bunch of eggs hopefully will get fertilized and they will turn eventually into new babies or new fishes. On land, there is also external fertilization or external production of the or formation of the baby or the offspring. Now, what happens for land? Now, for land, since there is no water, you have some type of modification. Now, what happens basically, the placenta, it's modified. So placenta, it's actually found inside some type of shell. An example would be the bird's egg. Birds, eggs. Birds basically lay the egg and then the embryo will develop in the egg itself and then eventually turns into an offspring. Now, the extraembryonic membrane, they have to be developed and they have to be actually inside the shell, as I mentioned earlier. Now, which one would it be? Basically, in the egg, you would have the egg white, which is contains a lot of the proteins that are needed for the baby or for the embryo to develop with all the nutrients. Then you have the yolk, which has most of the enzyme, and that's where the actual embryo is found, or the embryo will start developing from. Now, mammalian placenta, this is the most important one. Why? Because it shares the tissue between the mother and the fetus. Now, in the placenta, basically, they find that's where the mom is connected with the baby. So that's where where the nutrients come, waste is removed. Also, this placenta keeps the body hydrated. Same thing for bird eggs. That's why they have to have that shell so it can keep it hydrated. It can keep the embryo hydrated inside. If the embryo gets dehydrated or if the egg cracks before the embryo fully developed, then the baby will dry up or the chicken will dry up or the bird will dry up and there's no offspring. For mammalian placenta, definitely there's no problem because the mammalian placenta is found inside the body, but also the baby has to develop in that placenta. Here, you guys can see basically how the actual gonads or the male organs and female organs develop. We all look like this at the beginning. We all look exactly like this at the beginning. After about 5 weeks, at 5 weeks, that's when we start producing. If you are female and you have two XX chromosome or both chromosomes are XX, or if you're a male, you have X and Y, you start producing testosterone. So about 5 weeks, that's when differentiation starts taking place. So if you look right here, that's what we look like. Eventually, if you notice right here, this would be the clit, and this is the penis, basically. So basically, the penis, it's just an enlarged clit throughout the evolution, or throughout development in the mother's womb. So basically, if you notice right here, this is the vagina. Here, males, it's kind of like folding together. So then eventually we end up with the scrotum right there. So this part right here is part of the old vagina in the males. Females will actually, the labia stays unfolded, and that's how the basically the vulva will form. So basically we all were the same at one point throughout development. The difference, the one thing that made the difference, it's the Y chromosome. If we are male, remember on the Y chromosome, we have the gene to develop or to produce testosterone. Females don't have that, and then they produce estrogen. And as we're gonna learn today, we both actually, females and males, produce in very tiny amounts both of the hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen and testosterone. Quickly, let's go over the male reproductive system made up of testes, epididymis, vas deferens, and penis. We all know what testes are. Testes basically are there to produce sperm. Sperm is produced right here in the inside, and we're going to go in a minute over it. Epididymis is basically this tube right here, or these coil tubes that you're going to find attached to the testes. And basically, coil tubes they pick up the sperm, or they conduct the sperm from the testes to the vas deferens. These ones right here are the vas deferens. These are basically the tubes that the male gets tied them up when they don't want to have babies. These are the tubes that they have to have them tie them up. And then you have the penis, which is not a muscular. I put there muscular, but it's actually not a muscle. It's a spongy tissue. So remember, I just put it there so I can figure out if you guys know or not. If you guys get it right or wrong. Penis, it's not a muscle. If it was a muscle, you would go to the gym, you'll work it out, and it's going to grow bigger, right? Like regular muscles. But penis doesn't grow bigger because it's a muscle. Penis, it's a spongy tissue. Spongy, like a sponge, basically filled up with blood vessel, filled up with blood vessels. So the better the circulation in the penis region, the better the penis is, the harder the penis gets. So basically what it does, the penis, it transfers or facilitates transfer of sperm to the female. What is sperm? Sperm is basically a fluid comprised of products from seminal vesicle, prostate gland, and bulbourethral gland. Now, seminal vesicles are inside the testes. Seminal vesicles are inside the testes. Oh, I'm sorry, not inside the testes. It's right here, sorry. Seminiferous tubules are inside the testes. Seminal vesicle, it's right here. Then, if you look right here, you can see the actual prostate gland right next to it. Prostate gland, and right here in this region, you have the bulbourethral gland. So you have bulbourethral gland, seminal vesicles, and then we have the prostate is right there, the prostate. Now, what each one does? Seminal vesicle just produces a fluid that nourishes the sperm. Nourish means kind of like feeds the sperm. Prostate produces a fluid that's involved in motility or movement. Bulbourethral gland is just producing a lubricating secretion needed during copulation. So it's that fluid that you get right before copulation, or the fluid that you get during the foreplay. So that's part of or it comes from the bulbourethral gland. Here you could see a big testes. Now, when you look inside the testes, this is part of the epididymis. Remember, I showed you earlier. This is going to be the vas deferens right here. Now, this epididymis right here is a bunch of tubes right here, kind of coiled up. Here also you have the seminiferous tubules, where the actual meiosis takes place. That's where meiosis takes place, in the seminiferous tubules right there. Now, check it out how they look like. This is basically a seminiferous tubule. So if you look at it, you do a cross section through it, you could see where the actual spermatogenesis or production of sperm takes place. You can see here a normal cell. While it goes through different steps, eventually it turns spermatogonium, primary, spermatocyte, secondary, and then eventually a spermatid, which will develop into a mature sperm once it's moving to the vas deferens and it acquires all the liquids or all the fluids that it needs. So spermatogenesis, it's production of sperm, and sperm is produced basically in the seminiferous tubules. Here, a sperm or a spermatid looks like this. It has a head, a middle piece, and a tail. So head, middle piece, and then the tail. Tail is just there to swim. It's like a flagellum that's ready to swim. Middle part, it's where mitochondria is going to be found. So right here is mitochondria. Now, as we learned earlier, mitochondria, it's involved basically in production of energy. So this middle part right here requires or it has mitochondria, which will help the tail swimming or move so it can advance. And right at the top, you have the head part, which contains the nucleus. Now in the nucleus, what do we have? We have the chromosomes, right? All the chromosomes are right in here. Now, since the sperm is haploid, it means that we have 23 chromosomes. Now, also at the top, right here on the head, there is this little cover like there. This little cover right here at the top contains enzymes. Now, these enzymes are very important. This part right here is called the acrosome, and it contains these enzymes which are important. We're going to learn later. During actual fertilization, it breaks down the zona pellucida. This enzyme break down the egg shell, or the outside of the egg, zona pellucida it's called. So basically the spermatid can release the nucleus that's inside into the egg. Now, male produce about 40 million sperms per milliliter. Way fewer than that. Only about 100 reach the egg. Why do we produce so many? Because this sperm has a long way to get from the vagina all the way to the fallopian tubes where actual fertilization takes place. Now, a lot of them are basically incapable to even reach halfway or even past the vagina. A lot of these sperm. So that's why we produce so many. Hopefully, a few of them reach the egg, and hopefully they have enough energy left to just release the enzymes and then penetrate the egg and release the chromosomes. Now, male produce two important hormones. Both of these hormones, important ones, are found in our head. Head means where? In the pituitary gland. So remember, later when we do the hormones or the endocrine glands, we're gonna talk about pituitary gland. So in the pituitary gland, we produce the LH hormone and the FSH hormone. Luteinizing LH, follicle stimulating hormone. Now, female produce both hormones the same way as males in the pituitary gland, these two of them. Now, basically, FSH promotes spermatogenesis, and LH, or the luteinizing hormone promotes testosterone production in males. We're going to see in females, they have a little bit different function. FSH will promote oogenesis, or formation of the egg, and the LH will promote basically the production of the estrogen, the other hormone. Now, testosterone is produced in males because it's needed for the development of the penis and the male features. Now, testosterone, please remember, it's produced in the testes. It's produced in the testes. Where? In the interstitial cells of the testes. So testosterone, the male that gives us the features, it's produced with the help of another hormone, LH. If we don't produce LH, testosterone level will drop. Female reproductive system, made up of ovaries, oviducts or fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, and vagina. So here it is. Females have two holes. This is part of the urinary tract in the front, and this is part of the reproductive tract. So females have two holes, okay? Urinary, through which they pee right here in the front, and the back is the reproductive one. Now, the outside part right here, it's the vagina. Vagina, it's slightly acidic. It's a canal, tube canal, whatever you want to call it, but it's slightly acidic because it's required, or it's needed to not allow pathogens to enter the main reproductive region right in here. So vagina, it's warm, it's dark, and it is slightly acidic. Now, right at the entrance, or the connection between uterus, which is this part right here, and vagina, we have this region right here, which is called the cervix. Cervix is just an opening that connects the vagina with the uterus. Now, uterus, it's a muscle. Why is it a muscle? because baby needs to develop, or the baby will develop in the uterus. It needs to be a muscle because it needs to be flexible. It needs to expand. If it was a bone or cartilage, baby could not develop or would be very, very tiny. Now, being a muscle, it actually can expand by being flexible and allows the baby to develop. And also, important part, it's during birth. That's when this uterus is very important, because that muscle, what does it have to do? It has to push basically so the baby will come out. Connected to the uterus, then you have the fallopian tubes, these tubes or the oviducts that connect to the parts right here. You see how these ones are attached a little bit, kind of like these little fibers kind of type to the uterus. So basically the oviducts conduct the egg from the ovaries to the uterus. We're going to learn in a little bit that these eggs, after are fertilized, will actually travel along the oviducts and then eventually will end up in the establishing in the uterus. You can see them right here. This part right here, it's the eggs. That's where the eggs will develop. These are the ovaries. This is the ovaries, which contain the eggs. Okay. Then the eggs are released in the fallopian tubes, where the actual fertilization takes place in here. Fertilization. I want to talk to you about it from now so you guys can remember for the exam. So fertilization takes place during the fallopian tubes or the oviducts. Now, the ovaries, this is a blown up ovaries right here. That's where the actual oogenesis takes place. Basically, what's happening right here, females are born with a bunch of these follicles, a few million follicles. Now, these follicles contain the oocytes. Oocyte is an immature egg. Now remember, females go through a menstrual cycle. A menstrual cycle, what it does, basically, the immature egg turns into a mature egg, or an egg that could be fertilized. So females have immature eggs, which will turn through the menstrual cycle, MS I call it, into mature eggs that are ready to fertilize. Now, this menstrual cycle, actually, it's controlled by two hormones, the estrogen and the progesterone. And we're going to go over that one in a couple of minutes. But remember, immature eggs turn into mature eggs during menstrual cycle. So how many eggs will actually mature? Only about 400 to 450 throughout the life of a female. How many eggs is female born with, or immature eggs? A few millions, 2 to 4 millions eggs. Now, when a mature egg, it's produced through the process of oogenesis. So right here, you can see the process of oogenesis. Oogenesis. So basically, you start with an oogonium, which is the immature egg, which is diploid, right there. Now, this one will go through multiple steps until it turns into the secondary oocyte, which is the egg. Now, when female releases, or the follicles ruptures, it leaves behind this region, which is called corpus luteum. Now, this corpus luteum, it's very important. That's how basically the female body knows not to go into menstruation or into menstrual cycle next month. If the follicle, if the egg is fertilized along here, if the egg is fertilized, let's put fertilized, then this corpus luteum will sticks around. That's how basically it sends a message to the other ovary: do not go through the process of oogenesis to form a new egg. If there is no fertilization, for the egg, basically this corpus luteum will just disintegrate and degenerate, and then basically it sends a message to the other ovary to produce a new egg. So basically, who controls how many, or if we make or a female makes an egg every month? It's the actual corpus luteum. It's the one that sends the message. So more or less of the hormones are produced. So a new egg it's needed or not. So it's the corpus luteum. If it stays past disintegration, it tells that fertilization takes place. If it heals or if it just goes away, it tells the other ovary to produce a new egg. Now, the ovarian cycle or menstrual cycle, it's made up or it's controlled by two hormones, FSH and LH. Remember, these are produced in the head, in the anterior pituitary gland. Now, these two hormones control other two hormones, which are produced in the ovaries, estrogen and progesterone. Progesterone. So remember, these are produced in the head, in the pituitary gland, somewhere here in the head. Now, menstrual cycle divided into two phases, follicular and luteal phase. Basically, during follicular, FSH produces or forms the egg, matures follicle, and promotes also release of estrogen. Luteal phase, produced or stimulated by the LH, basically results in development of corpus luteum and release of the second hormone. So FSH, what it does, it matures the follicle, so formation of the egg, and also estrogen controls. LH, basically, corpus luteum develops it. It just basically keeps it developed, and then progesterone release. Now, let's go over what it happens. Menstrual cycle takes about 28 days. Now, day number 1, which is a lot of times people don't know, or guys definitely don't realize that. Females, I don't know, a lot of them don't know either. Menstrual cycle basically starts with menstruation. First day of menstruation, that's when it's considered day 1 of the ovarian cycle or the menstrual cycle. Now, this day 1 through 14, when actual ovulation takes place. So if you look at this picture right here, you don't even have to read these ones or memorize them. You just look at the picture and try to get a visual memory of it. Follicular phase is the first part. Luteal phase, it's after. Basically, here, egg forms and it's released. And here it stays past release. Yes or no? If it stays past release, it means that it was fertilized. If it doesn't, it means that the corpus luteum will disintegrate. So during follicular phase, basically from day 1 and 5, if you look right here, between day 1 and 5, till about here, that's when the menstruation takes place. Menstruation. Basically, estrogen and progesterone are very low. If you look right here, analogy, here is the analysis of above is the hormones. At the bottom, it is what it happens, or how what happens with the female development. So 1 through 5, it's menstruation. Between 5 and 14, basically, estrogen promotes the development of endometrium. Endometrium, it's that part, or the outside part, or the top part of the uterus. Now, the top part of the uterus, it's pretty thin. Now, if you want to have a healthy baby, this endometrium has to actually thicken, and it has to develop, and it has to basically produce a lot of blood vessels in here. Why? Because it needs to prepare for the egg to fertilize eggs, or the zygote or the embryo to start invaginating to it. And then this embryo requires nutrients and needs to dispose of the waste. So if there's no blood vessels or there is no preparation, then the baby will never form. So basically what happened between 5 and 14, the actual endometrium right here, it starts getting bigger, larger and larger. Now around day 13, 14, that's when the egg is released. Now this part right here, it's called proliferative because you proliferate, you make that uterus, the muscle part basically thickens, so it produces a lot of blood vessels. Second phase or second part is the luteal phase. Now in the luteal phase, and by the way, let me go back here, I forgot one thing. You also have to follow and look at the hormones. Now the first hormone they start picking up during the proliferative phase, it's actually estrogen starts going up. Now you notice that estrogen reaches a max close to ovulation. Now after ovulation, estrogen goes down. So who's going to pick up and takes its spot and help? It's actually the progesterone. So around week 4, right during ovulation, progesterone will pick up. Now, second phase, which is the luteal phase, that's when basically endometrium, it's fully developed. Now, if invagination or the actual attachment of the egg, the fertilized egg takes place, that's when basically baby can invaginate and then baby will attach to the uterus and then will start development, its development. If nothing happens or there's no fertilized egg that can invaginate or attach right here, then a new menstruation starts. Now, if you notice here, progesterone is the one that drives the second part, and then, oh, sorry, right here, progesterone drives the second part, and towards the end of the menstrual cycle, if there is no baby or no invagination, that's when both hormones actually come back to their lower levels seen at the beginning. Now that's why female, it's considered that they PMS. It's called PMSing. You know, they have hard times before menstruation because their hormones go up and down and up and down. Males, they don't have this problem. Now, right here at the end, female have menstruation because basically endometrium, the part here that has a lot of blood vessels prepared with the blood, full of blood, will disintegrate or will start falling apart, and then menstruation will occur. So basically female, what it does during menstruation, eliminates all these blood vessels, all this energy that it put into forming these blood vessels and increasing the endometrium. Now, estrogen, it's involved in normal development, function of reproductive organ, and the secondary characteristics, body hair and fat distribution. So remember, fat distribution in female, it's different than males. Why? Because female produce a lot of estrogen. Estrogen is the one that drives those cellulite that you see on the females on the hips, not hips, sorry, on the back, what is it called? The back of the legs, the back of the legs and the buttocks. Males don't really have too much because we do not have estrogen, but we have love handles because testosterone actually stimulates the distribution of fat in males in the love handle area and the belly area. Progesterone is the second hormone the female produce. Male do not produce this one. Basically, together with estrogen, forms the breast or involved in breast development, and it's responsible for thickening of the endometrium. As I mentioned here, it picks up later. Now, let's talk about the actual embryonic membrane that help with the development of the baby. This part right here basically would be the uterus. This is the endometrium, the part that prepared for the baby. So assume that we are in this stage right here where the baby, it's already invaginated and it's already starts growing here. Now, there is 4 membranes that form or they are needed. We have the outside part, which is the chorion or the placenta. The chorion or the placenta basically attaches to the endometrium, to the uterus. You see how they invaginate right here? Now, these are the parts that basically involved in getting rid of the waste, picking up the nutrients and the gases. Now, there is a yolk sac right here. This part or this region right here is the one that controls basically the blood. So baby makes its own blood, makes own blood. That's how a female can have a different blood group than a baby. Then you have the umbilical cord or the allantois. the umbilical cord or the allantois. Then you have the amnion, which is the inside part right here, which makes up or contains the fluid, which is the amniotic fluid, basically, which is involved in the helping the baby or protecting the baby from or cushioning the baby from vibrations, sudden movements, and all kind of other things that could damage the baby. Fertilization, kind of like backwards a little bit. We talked already how the baby will, or the membrane that are required, and now let's talk about fertilization. Basically, when an egg comes together with the sperm, it's fertilized by the sperm, and then it forms the zygote. Now, if you notice right here, you see the egg, and it has this region that I was talking about earlier. This is called zona pellucida. This sperm comes in close proximity. Once it gets next to the zona pellucida, releases this enzyme. This enzyme starts digesting or breaking down this wall right here, and eventually they will release the nucleus inside. Once the nucleus is released inside from one of the sperms, this wall here becomes impenetrable. No other sperm that's trying to penetrate will actually be able or will be able to release its sperm inside. Nucleus, not sperm, sorry, will not be able to release the sperm inside. So zona pellucida is the outside part. Acrosome, it's basically the area where the sperm secretes the enzyme. Here you have a picture of how an egg with a bunch of sperms on its vicinity look like. Now what happens prior to implantation? Implantation takes place a little bit later. So far we had fertilization where the egg turns into a zygote. So the egg right now, it's not an egg because it has twice the number of chromosomes now. So now it's called the zygote. Now zygote will go through multiple division, or will start dividing, goes from 1 cell to 2 cells to 4 cells to 8 cells, so forth and so on. Now this division, it's called cleavage. The name of the division that takes place for the zygote, it's called cleavage. Now the first structure that it forms, it's called morula. Morula then develops into a fluid-filled ball, which is called blastocyst or blastula. Then the blastula or the blastocyst will actually invaginate into the uterus. Now placenta starts forming, and they secrete this hormone, which is called human gonadotropin hormone, which basically helps us to, it's called birth control, not birth control, it's called testing for pregnancy. So it's a pregnancy test. That's the time when basically the females start producing the human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. This one basically will tell us if you are positive or negative. Now, can you give you a false positive? Yes. Why? Because some females produce large amounts of human gonadotropin hormone naturally. So that does not mean in 100% of the cases, but most of the cases, when you have high level of HCG, it means that we are pregnant. And when do we produce it? Basically, when the placenta start forming after the blastocyst implantation. Here you could see zygote, 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, solid ball, morula, then blastula right here. Blastula, it's like a fluid-filled ball. You can see right here, egg released, fertilization taking place, cleavage happening, you end up with morula, and then eventually blastula, which will implant or invaginate in the endometrium. This part right here is the one that we talked about earlier, that's filled up with blood vessels and it's thickened up. So it can produce all those blood vessels. The next step, it's called gastrulation. After invagination, basically blastula turns into gastrula. Now, what the heck happened right here? You see right here, this is blastula. The process is called gastrulation, and it forms the gastrula right here. It has all these layers that form. Now, there is 3 main layers, or embryonic layer, or germ layer. Ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. Ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. Ectoderm develops into skin and nervous system. endoderm, digestive tract, and mesoderm, muscle and bones. So if I ask you your tarsal are part of what embryonic germ layer? Obviously, it's part of mesoderm because it's muscle and bones. If I will ask you your heart, it's also mesoderm. If I'll ask you your stomach or your esophagus, it's part of what embryonic germ layer? You're gonna tell me that it's the endoderm. If I ask you about the nervous system, you're gonna tell me that it's part of the ectoderm. So basically, you can see all the layers right here. Ectoderm, endoderm, and then mesoderm is right there. Now, what happens at 5 weeks? Basically, babies have flippers or limb buds, which will give rise to arms, and legs will give rise to arm and the legs. Now, at the same time, what else it's forming? The head and the sensory organs. Now, check out how the baby looks like at 5 weeks. Pretty interesting. This is basically the butt region right here. This would be the legs. This part is the head right here. And this is the eye right there. That's how the baby looks like. Now you can see here the umbilical cord, the blood vessels that attach basically the mom to the baby. That's how basically the baby looks like. Pretty interesting. You can see right here how it looks like. And you can see some of the organs start forming. So umbilical cord formed at 5 weeks, connecting the embryo to the chorion, to the placenta. And allantois forms and the connection to placenta right now it's completed at 5 weeks. Now, these projections right here where the baby attaches to the mother, these are called villi. These ones right there are called chorionic villi. Basically, these parts right here, they attach to they extend into the uterus, they attach to the endometrium, to the uterus there. And then this is the region, you see this purplish region right here, that's where the baby and the mom basically release the gases, the nutrients, and the waste. So the mom brings fresh oxygen and nutrients, releases it in this region right here. Baby picks it up from this region right here. Now baby releases in this region the waste and the carbon dioxide, and the mom picks it up. That's why during pregnancy, moms go and pee a lot because they have to get rid of the waste of the baby too. The baby basically cannot pee and cannot release the waste unless the mom does that. So this region right here that extends into the placenta, those are called chorionic villi, chorionic villi. Now let's go see what happens at the end of the first trimester. Basically, after 9 weeks, the baby is called the fetus, and he can move its arm and legs and finally start looking somewhat human. Extraembryonic membrane form, all major organs are established. All this stuff happens in the first trimester. Once everything is established, in the second part, the baby is just increasing in size and refining and making their and growing basically its organs. At 20 weeks, it's about 19 centimeters, weighs about this much. So it takes 20 weeks for the baby to weigh about half a kilo or 1 pound. Third trimester, basically that's when everything it's rapidly growing and developing. So all the organs and all the parts that are needed have to mature. Muscle thickens, skeleton hardens, and eventually around 36 to 38 weeks, the baby is born. 36 to 38 weeks. Now, can babies be born prematurely or early? Yes. At 28 weeks, that's the most premature that it can be and could survive. But they need, as I mentioned here, extensive medical care. So what do? They keep him probably for another 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks in an incubator which mimics the actual mother's womb. And the baby has to be fed there, has to be kept at the right temperature so the organs can actually fully develop. Remember, this is the rapid growth. That's when the organs will develop. So at 36 to 38 weeks, that's when the birth occurs. It could be naturally or through C-section. Now, let's talk lastly, but not last, about STDs or sexually transmitted diseases. Basically, there is four main types: viral STDs, bacterial STDs, yeast, and protozoa. Sexually transmitted diseases, basically it means that all these diseases could be or are transmitted through sex. Viruses are the most dangerous one. Why is that? Because viruses we cannot get rid of them. We can treat them with antivirals, or we can treat them with vaccines, but we cannot get rid of them. And these viruses also, what is really bad about them, they leave sometimes their marks into our genome. They can actually mark our genome. Now, a couple of the sexually transmitted diseases, AIDS, which is the most devastating one. AIDS killed a lot of people back in the days. Why? Because AIDS is not the virus. HIV is the virus. So remember, this is the HIV is the virus. This causes AIDS. HIV is the virus which causes AIDS. HIV attacks basically the immune system. Genital warts, basically produced by the HPV virus, HPV, human papilloma virus. Genital herpes, basically it's produced by the herpes virus. Herpes. Now it's a herpes or simplex virus it's called. Now this one is pretty bad because what it does, it produces a lot of blisters on the genital area. Now if you guys are really interested, go to Google, type genital herpes, and you see a bunch of pictures and you can figure out how it is. It comes in very handy because sometimes, you know, when we go out and we have sex, we're not really careful who we have it with. And actually, it's very interesting. All what you need for genital herpes to be transmitted, you just need one small blister that pops during sex, and that blister passes, or the virus attaches to the skin of the other person that probably didn't have it, and then easily can be transmitted. And the last one is hepatitis, produced by the virus hepatitis C. So these are the worst ones. Bacteria, they are really bad too. The problem with bacteria is that we can cure them. How? Using antibiotics. Now, I know from a friend of mine that had gonorrhea that it's pretty much that's what he told me. I don't know if it lies to me, I lie to you too, guys. But it's gonorrhea. I know he had to treat it through every month, had to take a bunch of antibiotics for 6 months before he could get rid of it. So these ones are dangerous, but not as dangerous as the viruses. Chlamydia, pelvic inflammatory disease, gonorrhea, and syphilis. These are the type of the bacterial STDs. So you can see right here, chlamydia given by this microbial agent, gonorrhea is this, and syphilis is this one right here. How do you treat? If you notice, all of them are treated with antibiotics. And you can see also the symptoms here if you're really interested. But usually bacteria, what they do, they release a lot of pus in that region, and it looks really nasty. The last two, yeast and protozoa. Yeast, it's basically a fungus. So yeast, you're going to encounter more often than bacteria and viruses. And one of the yeast, one of the diseases called candidiasis, or yeast infection, but it's produced by the Candida albicans. That's what is called the actual microbial agent. Now, as I mentioned earlier, usually female get a lot of times yeast. Even though a lot of times it's not sexually transmitted, you can have yeast. Why? Because female have the perfect environment in the vagina. It's dark and it's moist. That's why the acidity is there. As the acidity stays normal levels, it's very hard to get the yeast. But if the acidity in the vagina drops, that's when probably you have an increased chance of acquiring the fungus yeast. Protozoa is just basically a unicellular organism. It's those small, tiny, microscopic organisms that can find room in the air, like Trichomoniasis or Trichomonas vaginalis. That's the actual microbe that actually can find room in the vagina and leads to this infection, which is called Trichomoniasis. Now, usually for these ones, you get like irritation and itching. That's the main, and with some discharge. It's not pus, but looks like discharge. Now, can male have that one? Yes, they can do it, but there's not too many effects of protozoa or the yeast. And this is all about the